The leather belt came down like thunder across 17-year-old Luna Mae Winter's back, again and again, until her father's rage was spent and her spirit nearly broken. But when a childless Sioux couple saw the bruises on her arms at the trading post, they knew they had found the daughter their hearts had been waiting for, and Luna Mae discovered that family wasn't about blood, but about the courage to choose love over fear. The morning sun hadn't yet crested the Dakota hills when Luna Mae heard her father's boots stomping across the cabin floor, each step heavier than the last, each one promising another day of walking on eggshells in her own home. She pressed her face deeper into the rough wool blanket that served as her only comfort, trying to make herself invisible, trying to disappear into the shadows that had become her refuge.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
Girl. Silas Winters bellowed from the main room, his voice already thick with the whiskey he'd been nursing since before dawn. Get yourself out here before I come drag you out by your hair. Luna Mae's hands trembled as she pulled on her worn calico dress, the fabric thin from countless washings and patches upon patches, where her father's fists and belt had torn through both cloth and skin. The mirror above her washstand showed a face that belonged to someone much older than 17, eyes that had seen too much, a jawline set with the kind of determination that came from years of surviving rather than living. She stepped into the main room of their ramshackle cabin, where Silas sat hunched over the kitchen table, his graying beard matted with yesterday's food and his bloodshot eyes fixed on the empty whiskey bottle before him. The cabin smelled of stale alcohol, unwashed bodies, and the lingering smoke from a fire that had burned low hours ago. Through the single window, she could see the Dakota Territory stretching endlessly toward the horizon, beautiful and wild and free in ways that she had never been allowed to be. You forgot to milk the cow again, Silas growled, though they both knew the cow had died 3 weeks ago and he'd been too drunk to remember. And the chickens ain't been fed, and there's no breakfast on this table, and you're standing there looking at me like you don't know what work means. Luna Mae had learned long ago not to correct her father when he was in one of his moods, not to point out that she'd already chopped wood, drawn water from the well, and tried to make something edible from their dwindling supplies. Instead, she kept her eyes on the floor and her voice soft. The way experience had taught her might keep his hands from reaching for the belt that hung on the nail beside the door. "I'm sorry, Pa," she whispered. "I'll get started on breakfast right now." But Silas was already rising from his chair, swaying slightly as the alcohol in his system made the simple act of standing a challenge. His eyes, once a clear blue like her own, had become clouded with years of drinking and bitterness, and the kind of rage that had nowhere to go but down onto the shoulders of a daughter, who reminded him too much of the wife who died bringing her into the world. "Sorry don't fill a man's belly," he snarled, and his hand was already moving toward the belt. "Sorry don't make up for having a worthless daughter who can't do nothing right. Your mama died because of you. And every day since then you've been nothing but a burden and a reminder of what I lost." The belt came off the nail with a sound Luna Mae knew too well, leather against wood, the whisper of violence about to be unleashed. She didn't flinch any more when she saw it in his hands, didn't cry out or beg for mercy the way she had when she was younger. Those reactions only made him angrier, made him hit harder, made him believe that fear was the same thing as respect. "Turn around," he ordered, and she obeyed, presenting her back to him the way she'd done hundreds of times before. The dress she wore was already torn in places where previous beatings had split the fabric, and she could feel the cool morning air against skin that bore the permanent marks of his anger. The first blow landed across her shoulder blades, sending fire racing down her spine and stealing the breath from her lungs. The second caught her across the middle of her back, and the third lower still, each strike deliberate and measured, designed not just to cause pain, but to remind her of her place in this cabin, in this life, in his world. "Worthless," he panted. Between blows, Just like your mama. Could never do nothing right. Always disappointing me. Always making me have to discipline you like you're some kind of animal. Luna May bit down on her tongue until she tasted blood, focusing on that small pain to keep from crying out and giving him the satisfaction of knowing he was breaking her. She'd learned to count the blows in her head, to make mental lists of chores that needed doing, to think about anything except the leather cutting through her dress and into her skin. When it was over, when Silas's arm was tired and his immediate rage was spent, he let the belt drop to the floor and collapsed back into his chair. Luna May remained standing with her back to him, waiting for permission to move, waiting for the signal that this particular storm had passed. "Clean yourself up and get to town," he finally said, his voice returning to its normal gravelly tone. "We need supplies, and old Henderson at the trading post said he'd give us credit if we brought him some of that elderberry wine your mama used to make. You still got some of them berries dried?" Luna May nodded carefully, not trusting her voice just yet. She had been saving the elderberries, planning to make preserves to help them through the winter. But if trading them for supplies would keep her father calm for a few days, it was worth the sacrifice. "Yes, Pa," she managed. "I'll get them ready and head to town this morning." Silas waved a dismissive hand in her direction and reached for another bottle from beneath the table, already losing interest in her now that his anger had been satisfied. Luna May moved carefully toward the corner where she kept her few possessions, each step sending fresh waves of pain through her abused back. She gathered the dried elderberries into a cloth sack, along with the small amount of sugar they had left and the precious bottle of her mother's recipe that she'd copied onto a piece of brown paper years ago. Her mother's handwriting had faded, but Luna May had memorized every word, every instruction, every small notation that Elizabeth Winters had made in the margins. The trading post was a 2-hour walk through the rolling Dakota hills, past streams that ran crystal clear and grasslands that stretched toward mountains she'd never seen up close. Luna May had made this journey countless times, but today felt different somehow, as if something was waiting for her in town that would change everything. She pulled on her mother's old shawl, the wool still carrying the faint scent of lavender and hope, and stepped out into the morning air. Behind her, she could hear Silas already mumbling to himself as he worked his way deeper into the bottle. And she knew he'd be unconscious by the time she returned. The walk to town gave her time to think, time to let her mind wander to places it wasn't allowed to go when she was under her father's watchful eye. She thought about the stories her mother used to tell her about life before Silas Winters, about growing up in a family where laughter was common and violence was unthinkable. She thought about the letters that sometimes came from her mother's sister back east, letters that Silas always burned without letting her read. Most of all, she thought about escape, not the dramatic kind she dreamed about as a child, running away in the night with nothing but the clothes on her back, but the practical kind that required planning and patience, and the kind of courage she wasn't sure she possessed. She was 17 now, old enough to marry if anyone would have her. Old enough to work for wages if anyone would hire a girl with no references and no family connections. But every time she started to make concrete plans, her father would have a good day, would speak kindly to her, or share a memory of her mother, and the guilt would creep back in. He was all the family she had left, and despite everything, he was still her father. The thought of leaving him alone to drink himself to death filled her with a complex mixture of relief and horror that she didn't know how to untangle. The trading post came into view as she crested the final hill, a sturdy log building with a covered porch where local farmers and ranchers gathered to exchange news and gossip. Henderson's trading post served a wide area of the Dakota Territory, catering to everyone from Scottish homesteaders to Irish immigrants to the Lakota Sioux, who came down from the reservation to trade for supplies they couldn't make themselves. Luna May had always been fascinated by the diversity of people who passed through Henderson's, especially the native families who carried themselves with a dignity and grace that seemed foreign to her world of violence and fear. She'd learned
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story.
To recognize some of the regular customers, had even exchanged shy smiles with some of the women. But her father had always warned her against getting too friendly with those people. Today, as she approached the trading post, she noticed a wagon parked beside the building that she didn't recognize. It was well made but not fancy, practical, in the way that suggested people who worked hard for what they had. 2 horses stood patiently in their traces, and she could hear voices coming from inside the store. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and the conversation stopped momentarily as the occupants turned to see who had arrived. Henderson stood behind the counter as always, his round face creased with the kind of smile that suggested he genuinely enjoyed his work. Near the back of the store, examining some leather goods, stood a man and woman she'd never seen before. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors. His hair was black with threads of silver at the temples, and he wore the practical clothes of someone who worked with his hands. But it was his eyes that caught Luna May's attention. Dark and kind and completely free of the anger that she'd learned to watch for in men's faces. The woman beside him was smaller but no less striking, with long black hair braided down her back and wearing a dress that combined traditional native patterns with frontier practicality. When she smiled at Luna May, her whole face lit up with genuine warmth, and for a moment, Luna May felt what it might be like to be welcomed somewhere instead of merely tolerated. "Morning, Luna May," Henderson called out cheerfully. "What brings you to town today? Your pay'll need more supplies already." Luna May clutched her sack of elderberries closer to her chest and approached the counter, acutely aware that the strangers were watching her with what seemed like concern rather than curiosity. "I've got some elderberries, Mr. Henderson," she said quietly. "Pa thought you might want to trade them for some flour and coffee." Henderson's expression grew more serious as he noticed the way she moved, the careful way she held herself that suggested injury beneath her clothes. He'd known Luna May since she was a small child, had watched her grow from a bright, curious little girl into the wary young woman who now stood before him with bruises barely concealed beneath her shawl. "Those are some fine elderberries," he said gently, accepting the sack and pretending not to notice when she winced as she lifted it onto the counter. "Your mama's recipe?" "Yes, sir," Luna May nodded. She always said Henderson's was the only place that appreciated good elderberry wine. The woman near the back of the store had moved closer during this exchange, and Luna May found herself the subject of an intense but not unkind scrutiny. When their eyes met, the woman smiled again, but there was something in her expression that suggested she saw more than Luna May was comfortable revealing. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice carrying a slight accent that Luna May couldn't place. "I'm Rose Moon Shadow, and this is my husband Daniel. We're new to the area, and I couldn't help but admire your shawl. It's beautiful work." Luna May touched the edge of her mother's shawl self-consciously, surprised to be addressed directly by a stranger. "Thank you," she managed. "It was my mother's." Rose Moon Shadow's eyes grew even kinder, if that was possible. She had excellent taste. "Did she teach you to weave?" "A little," Luna May admitted, "before she died. She said it was important for a woman to be able to make beautiful things, even when the world around her wasn't very beautiful." Daniel had joined his wife now, and both of them were looking at Luna May with an intensity that made her nervous. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, especially not the kind of attention that seemed to come from genuine interest rather than suspicion or anger. "How old are you, if you don't mind me asking?" Rose Moon Shadow said gently. 17, Luna May replied, wondering why these strangers cared about her age or her mother's shawl or anything else about her life. Henderson had finished examining the elderberries and was gathering the supplies Luna May had requested, but she could tell he was listening to the conversation with interest. "Luna May here is one of our finest young ladies," he said, with the kind of forced cheer that adults used when they were trying to cover up something unpleasant. "Lives out with her father on the old Winters place." Daniel and Rosemoon Shadow exchanged a look that Luna May couldn't interpret. But something passed between them that seemed significant. "The Winters place," Daniel repeated thoughtfully. "That's the cabin about 10 miles southeast of here? Near Willow Creek?" "Yes, sir," Luna May nodded, wondering how he knew about their remote location. "We've been looking at land in that area," Rosemoon Shadow explained. "We're hoping to start a small ranch. Maybe raise some horses. It's beautiful country." Out that way, Luna May felt a strange mixture of pride and embarrassment at having strangers discuss her home. The land around their cabin was indeed beautiful, with rolling hills and clear streams and wide skies that seemed to go on forever. But she also knew that anyone who came close enough to their property would see the broken fences, the leaning barn, the general air of neglect that surrounded everything Silas Winters touched. "It is pretty country," she agreed quietly, "though it can be lonely, being so far from town." Rosemoon Shadow's expression grew even more concerned, and she took a step closer to Luna May. "Lonely can be hard, especially for someone your age. Do you get to visit with friends very often?" The question hit Luna May like a physical blow, highlighting just how isolated her life had become. She couldn't remember the last time she'd had a conversation with someone her own age. Couldn't remember the last time anyone had asked about her well-being or her happiness. "Not really," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Pa keeps me pretty busy with chores around the place." Henderson cleared his throat and pushed the bundle of supplies across the counter toward her. "There you go, Luna May. Flour, coffee, and a little extra sugar since those elderberries were particularly nice." She reached for the supplies, and as she did, her shawl slipped slightly, revealing the edge of a bruise that darkened her collarbone. Rosemoon Shadow's sharp intake of breath was barely audible, but Luna May heard it and quickly pulled the shawl back into place. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," she said hurriedly. Gathering the supplies and preparing to leave before anyone could ask questions she didn't know how to answer. But Rosemoon Shadow stepped forward, her movements careful and non-threatening. "Luna May," she said softly, "my husband and I are staying at the boarding house here in town for a few days while we look at properties. If you ever need anything, or if you just want someone to talk to, please know that you're welcome to visit us." The offer was so unexpected, so kind, that Luna May felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back quickly, knowing that crying in public would only raise more questions and possibly get back to her father. "That's very kind of you, ma'am," she managed, "but I should be getting back. Pa will be expecting me." Daniel spoke for the first time since the introductions, his voice deep and gentle. "Of course. But the offer stands, sometimes. It helps to have friends, especially when life gets difficult." There was something in the way he said it that made Luna May look up at him sharply. His dark eyes held a knowing expression, as if he understood exactly what kind of difficulty she might be facing. For a moment, she felt a wild urge to tell him everything, to spill out all the years of fear and pain and loneliness. Instead, she nodded politely and headed for the door, clutching her supplies and trying to ignore the way both Daniel and Rosemoon Shadow watched her leave with expressions of deep concern. The walk home seemed longer than usual, partly because of the weight of the supplies and partly because her mind kept returning to the unexpected encounter at the trading post. No one had spoken to her with such kindness in longer than she could remember, and the memory of Rose Moon Shadow's genuine smile felt like a warm coal in her chest. As she approached the cabin, she could hear Silas singing tunelessly to himself, which meant he was well into his second bottle of the day. She slowed her steps, knowing that drunk could mean either unconsciously peaceful or violently unpredictable. "Luna May," he called out as she entered the cabin. "There's my good girl. Did old Henderson treat you fair?" "Yes, Pa," she said carefully, setting the supplies on the table and beginning to put them away. He said the elderberries were particularly nice. Silas beamed at her with the sloppy affection that alcohol sometimes brought out in him. Course they were. Your mama's recipe never failed. She was a good woman, your mama. Too good for a man like me. These moments of maudlin sentiment were almost harder to bear than his anger. When Silas was violent, Luna May could hate him cleanly, could focus on survival and protection. But when he was like this, remembering her mother with love and regret, she was reminded that he hadn't always been a monster. She loved you. Pa, Luna May said softly, because it was true and because he needed to hear it. Did she? Silas asked, his eyes growing watery. Even after everything I put her through? Even after I started drinking so much? Even after I became the kind of man who raises his hand to his own daughter? The admission hung in the air between them, raw and painful. Luna May stood frozen at the cupboard, her hands still full of coffee and flour, not knowing how to respond to this rare moment of self-awareness. She loved us both, she finally said, and she'd want us to take care of each other. Silas nodded and took another long pull from his bottle. You're a good girl, Luna May, better than I deserve. Tomorrow I'll try to do better. Tomorrow I'll be the kind of father she'd want me to be. Luna May had heard these promises before, had built her hopes on them countless times only to have them shattered by the next morning's rage. But something about today felt different, maybe because of the kindness she'd encountered at the trading post, maybe because Rose Moon, Shadow's offer of friendship had reminded her that there were people in the world who chose gentleness over violence. I know you will, Pa, she said, and for the first time in years, she almost believed it might be true. 3 days passed in an uneasy peace at the Winters cabin, with Silas maintaining his promise of sobriety just long enough for Luna May to begin believing that change might actually be possible. But on Thursday morning, she woke to the sound of glass shattering and her father's voice raised in a fury that seemed to shake the very walls of their small home. Where is it? Silas roared, his voice carrying the particular edge that came when desperation met withdrawal. I know you hid it somewhere, you conniving little witch. Where's the money I had saved? Luna May sat up in her narrow bed, her heart already racing with the familiar dread that accompanied her father's rages. She knew exactly what money he was talking about, the small collection of coins she'd found hidden in his boot, and moved to prevent him from spending it all on liquor. It was barely enough to buy flour for the month, but in Silas's mind, it represented his right to drink himself into oblivion. I don't know what money you mean, Pa, she called out, knowing the lie would only make things worse, but hoping to buy herself time to think. The sound of his boots crossing the floor was like thunder in the small cabin, each step deliberate and menacing. When he appeared in her doorway, Luna May could see that the 3 days of relative sobriety had only served to sharpen his anger, to give it focus and intent that drunk rage rarely possessed. His eyes were bloodshot and wild, his hands shaking with the need for alcohol, and his face carried the gaunt look of a man whose body was rebelling against the absence of its daily poison. Don't lie to me, girl, he snarled, advancing into her small room. I had $14 hidden in my boot, and now it's gone. Money don't just walk away on its own. Luna May pulled her thin blanket up to her chin, as if the worn fabric could provide protection against what was coming. Maybe you moved it somewhere else, she suggested carefully. Sometimes when you've been drinking, you forget where you put things. The suggestion that his memory might be faulty sent Silas into an even greater fury. His hand shot out faster than she could dodge, catching her across the face with enough force to snap her head to the side and fill her mouth with the metallic taste of blood. I don't forget nothing, he spat. And I sure don't forget when my own daughter steals from me. That money was mine, earned by my sweat, and you got no right to touch it. Luna May's cheek burned where he'd struck her, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. I was trying to make sure we had enough for food, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Winter's coming, and we need supplies more than we need whiskey. The words were out before she could stop them, and she immediately regretted speaking so boldly. Silas's face turned a dangerous shade of red, and she could see the vein in his temple throbbing with barely contained violence. "Who are you to tell me what I need?" he demanded, grabbing her by the shoulders and hauling her out of bed. "You're nothing but a burden, a mouth to feed, a constant reminder of everything I lost when your mama died. If it wasn't for you, she'd still be alive. If it wasn't for you, I'd be free to live my life however I choose." Luna May had heard these accusations before, but they still cut deep every time. Her mother had indeed died in childbirth, and Silas had never let her forget that her very existence had cost him the only person he'd ever truly loved. The guilt was a constant weight on her shoulders, made heavier by the knowledge that part of her father's anger came from genuine grief. "I'm sorry, Pa," she whispered, the words automatic after years of trying to soothe his rage. "I just wanted to help." "Help?" Silas laughed bitterly. "You want to help? Then get out of my sight before I do something we'll both regret. Go to town, find work, earn your keep instead of living off my charity. Maybe old Henderson needs someone to sweep his floors. Or maybe the boarding house needs a girl to empty chamber pots. At least then you'd be useful for something." The suggestion wasn't entirely unreasonable, and Luna May found herself considering it seriously. She was 17, old enough to work for wages, and the idea of spending her days away from the cabin held an appeal she couldn't deny. But she also knew that leaving Silas alone for long periods might make his drinking worse, and despite everything, she still felt responsible for his welfare. "I could ask around town," she said carefully. "See if anyone needs help. But who would take care of things here? Who would make sure you eat proper meals and keep the cabin clean?" Silas waved a dismissive hand, already losing interest in the conversation now that his immediate anger was spent. "I've been taking care of myself longer than you've been alive," he muttered. "Don't need some slip of a girl thinking she's my keeper." Luna May nodded and began gathering her clothes, her mind already turning toward the possibility of regular work in town. The walk to Henderson's trading post would give her time to think about how to approach the subject, and maybe she'd even see Rosemoon's shadow and Daniel again. The memory of their kindness 3 days ago had lingered in her thoughts like a warm candle in a dark room. No one had spoken to her with such genuine concern in longer than she could remember, and the woman's offer of friendship had felt like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning in isolation. As she dressed and prepared for the journey to town, Luna May found herself wondering about Daniel and Rosemoon Shadow's story. They'd mentioned looking for land to start a horse ranch, but there had been something in their manner that suggested deeper currents. The way they'd looked at each other when they thought she wasn't watching, the careful kindness in their voices, the immediate concern when they'd glimpsed her bruises. The walk to town passed more quickly than usual, partly because of her eagerness to escape the tension at home, and partly because she was genuinely curious about what opportunities might be available. She'd never seriously considered working for wages before, had always assumed that her role was to keep house for her father until some man decided to marry her. But the idea of earning her own money, of having a reason to be away from the cabin for hours at a time, filled her with a hope she hadn't felt in years. Henderson's trading post was busier than usual when she arrived, with several wagons parked outside and the sound of animated conversation drifting through the open door. Luna May paused on the porch, suddenly uncertain about how to approach the subject of employment. She'd never asked for work before, had no idea what qualifications she might need or what wages she should expect. "Luna May." Henderson's voice boomed from behind the counter as she entered. "Good to see you again so soon. What brings you back to town?" Before she could answer, she noticed Daniel and Rosemoon Shadow standing near the back of the store, examining a display of farming tools. Rosemoon Shadow looked up at the sound of her name and immediately smiled, the same warm, welcoming expression that had made such an impression on their first meeting. "Hello again," Rosemoon Shadow called out. approaching with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to making friends quickly. "I was hoping we'd see you again. Daniel and I have been exploring the area, and we're more convinced than ever that this is where we want to settle." Luna May felt a flutter of something that might have been excitement at the prospect of having these kind strangers become permanent residents of the area. "That's wonderful," she said, meaning it sincerely. "The land around here is some of the finest in the territory." Daniel joined them, carrying a coil of rope that suggested they were making practical purchases for their future ranch. "We've been talking to folks about the area," he said, trying to get a sense of the community. "Everyone speaks very highly of your families." Placed near Willow Creek, Luna May felt heat rise in her cheeks, knowing that anyone who'd actually visited their property would have seen the signs of neglect and dysfunction that marked their daily life. "It's peaceful out there," she said carefully, "though it can be isolated." "Isolation has its benefits," Rosemoon Shadow said gently, "especially when you're trying to build something new. Sometimes you need space away from other people's expectations and judgments." There was something in the way she said it that made Luna May look at her more carefully. Rosemoon Shadow's dark eyes held a depth of understanding that suggested personal experience with judgment and expectations. And Luna May found herself wondering what challenges these two had faced in their own lives. "Mr. Henderson," Luna May said, turning back to the storekeeper and gathering her courage, "I was wondering if you might know of anyone in town who could use help. I'm looking for work, maybe cleaning or cooking or helping with children." Henderson's bushy eyebrows rose in surprise. "Work, you say? Well now, that's interesting. Your pa know you're looking for employment?" "He suggested it," Luna May said, which was technically true even if it left out the violent context of the suggestion. "We thought it might be good for me to earn some wages and learn about business." Rosemoon Shadow and Daniel exchanged another of their meaningful looks, and Luna May found herself wishing she could read the silent communication that seemed to pass so easily between them. After 17 years of living with a man whose moods changed like prairie weather, she couldn't imagine what it would be like to have such understanding with another person. As a matter of fact, Henderson said thoughtfully, "Mrs. Carmichael at the boarding house was just saying yesterday that she could use help with the heavy cleaning. And Doc Caldwell mentioned that his wife's been struggling to keep up with the housework since she hurt her back. Both of them pay fair wages for honest work." The possibility of regular employment sent a thrill of excitement through Luna May that she tried to keep from showing on her face. "Do you think they'd be willing to talk to me?" she asked. "I don't see why not," Henderson replied. "You're a good, hard-working girl from a respectable family. Want me to put in a word for you?" Luna May nodded eagerly, then caught herself and tried to appear more composed. "Yes, sir, that would be very kind of you." Rosemoon Shadow stepped closer, her expression thoughtful. "Luna May, forgive me if this is presumptuous, but Daniel and I are planning to build our ranch house over the next few months. We'll need someone to help with cooking for the work crews and keeping the temporary quarters clean. It wouldn't be permanent work, but it would be steady for several months." The offer was so unexpected that Luna May could only stare at her for a moment. Working for Daniel and Rosemoon Shadow would mean spending her days with people who had shown her nothing but kindness, who spoke to her as if her thoughts and feelings mattered. It would also mean being away from her father's cabin for most of each day, away from his unpredictable moods and violent outbursts. That would be wonderful," she finally managed. "But are you sure you'd want to hire someone with no references?" "I've never worked for wages before," Daniel smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "Sometimes the best workers are those who are eager to learn rather than those who think they already know everything. And from what we've observed, you have the kind of character that can't be taught." The kindness in his voice was almost overwhelming, and Luna May felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back quickly, not wanting to appear overly emotional, but the gesture of faith from these near strangers felt like a gift she'd never expected to receive. "When would you need me to start?" she asked, trying to sound professional despite her racing heart. "We're planning to break ground next week," Rosemoon Shadow said. "But if you're willing, you could come out to our temporary camp tomorrow and we could discuss the details. We're staying in a cabin about 5 miles north of town while we finalize our land purchase." Luna May's mind was already racing with the implications of this opportunity. Regular wages would mean independence she'd never imagined. The chance to save money for her own future rather than simply surviving day to day. More importantly, it would mean spending her time with people who treated her with respect and dignity. "I'd like that very much," she said. "What time should I come? How about mid-morning?" Daniel suggested. "That would give you time to discuss it with your father and make sure he's comfortable with the arrangement." The mention of her father brought Luna May back to reality with a sharp jolt. Silas would need to approve of any work arrangement, and his approval would depend entirely on his mood and his level of sobriety. If he was drinking heavily, he might refuse out of spite or possessiveness. If he was sober, he might agree. "For the sake of the income, I'll talk to him tonight," she promised. "I'm sure he'll see the wisdom in steady wages." Henderson had been listening to this exchange with obvious approval. "That's a fine arrangement," he said heartily. "Daniel and Rosemoon Shadow here are good people, Luna May. You couldn't ask for better employers." Rosemoon Shadow's smile grew even warmer. "We prefer to think of it as a partnership," she said. "We'll all be working together to build something good." Luna May spent another hour in town, speaking with Mrs. Carmichael about potential work at the boarding house and introducing herself to Dr. Caldwell's wife. Both women were encouraging, and Luna May found herself with the unexpected luxury of multiple employment options. The walk home was filled with a nervous excitement she hadn't felt in years. For the first time since her mother's death, she had something to look forward to, something that belonged to her alone. The prospect of earning her own wages, of having a reason to leave the cabin each day, of working alongside people who valued her contributions. It felt almost too good to be true. As she approached the cabin, she could hear Silas moving around inside, and her heart sank as she recognized the particular rhythm of someone searching desperately for hidden alcohol. Her brief absence had apparently been enough for his withdrawal symptoms to intensify, and she knew that approaching him about work would require careful timing and diplomacy. "Pa?" she called out as she entered the cabin. "I'm back from town." Silas emerged from the kitchen, his hair disheveled and his eyes wild with the particular desperation of an alcoholic denied his poison. "Did you find my money?" he demanded without preamble. Luna May took a deep breath and decided that honesty, combined with her news about potential employment, might be her best strategy. "I moved it to keep it safe," she admitted. "But Pa, I have good news. I found work in town. Regular wages that could help us get through the winter." Silas's expression shifted from anger to confusion to a wary hope. "Work? What kind of work?" "Helping build a new ranch house," Luna May explained. "Cooking for the work crews and keeping things clean. The pay is good, and it would be steady for several months." The mention of steady income seemed to penetrate Silas's alcohol-fogged thinking. He studied her face as if trying to determine whether this was some kind of trick. "Who's hiring you?" he asked suspiciously. "A couple named Daniel and Rosemoon Shadow," Luna May said. "They're building a horse ranch north of town. They seem like good people, and Henderson vouched for them." Silas considered this information, his expression cycling through various emotions. Luna May could see him weighing his need for money against his desire to maintain control over her daily life. Finally, practical concern seemed to win out. "How much?" he asked bluntly. "We didn't discuss specific wages yet," Luna May admitted. "I'm meeting with them tomorrow to work out the details." Silas nodded slowly, his hands still shaking with withdrawal, but his voice more rational than it had. "Then all morning, you'll give me half of whatever you earn," he declared. "Room and board ain't free, and you owe me for all the years I kept you fed and clothed." Luna May wanted to argue that keeping a child fed and clothed was a basic parental responsibility, not a favor that required repayment. But she also knew that having half of her wages would still leave her with more independence than she'd ever possessed. "Yes, Pa," she agreed. "That seems fair." Silas studied her for another long moment, then seemed to reach some internal decision. "All right then," he said. "You can take this job, but you'll come home every night and you'll keep up with your chores here, and if I hear you've been causing any trouble or embarrassing our family name, the arrangement ends. Understood?" Luna May nodded eagerly, hardly able to believe that he was actually agreeing to let her work. "Yes, sir, I understand completely." That evening, as she prepared a simple dinner from their meager supplies, Luna May found herself humming under her breath for the first time in months. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, and new opportunities. For the first time in her life, she would be valued for her skills rather than merely tolerated as a burden. More importantly, she would be spending her days with Daniel and Rose Moonshadow, people who had already shown her more kindness in 2 brief encounters than she'd experienced in years. The thought of working alongside them, of being part of something constructive and hopeful, filled her with an anticipation that made even her father's continued mutterings about hidden money seem bearable. As night fell over the Dakota hills, Luna May lay in her narrow bed and allowed herself to imagine a future that extended beyond mere survival. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of something new, something that belonged to her alone, and for the first time since her mother's death, she fell asleep with a smile on her lips. The morning sun painted the Dakota hills in shades of gold and crimson as Luna May made her way north toward Daniel and Rose Moonshadow's temporary camp, her heart beating with a mixture of excitement and nervousness that made every step feel like a small adventure. She had risen before dawn to complete her usual chores, leaving Silas still sleeping off the previous night's desperate search for hidden liquor. And now she walked through countryside that seemed more beautiful than she'd ever noticed before. The 5-mile journey took her through terrain that gradually shifted from the rolling grasslands near town to the more rugged hills where Daniel and Rose Moonshadow had chosen to make their temporary home. Ancient cottonwoods lined the creek beds, their leaves rustling with secrets in the morning breeze, while meadowlarks called from fence posts and prairie hawks circled overhead in lazy spirals. As she crested the final hill, Luna May caught her first glimpse of their camp and stopped in amazement, rather than the rough collection of tents and makeshift shelters she had expected. She saw a well-organized settlement that spoke of people who understood how to live comfortably on the land. A sturdy log cabin served as the main dwelling, with smoke rising from its chimney and horses grazing in a carefully fenced pasture. Nearby, several smaller structures surrounded the cabin, including what appeared to be a workshop, a storage shed, and a cookhouse with a stone chimney that suggested serious attention to meal preparation. Everything was clean, well-maintained, and arranged with the kind of thoughtful planning that spoke of people who took pride in their surroundings. Daniel emerged from the workshop as she approached, wiping his hands on a leather apron and smiling with the same warmth she remembered from their meetings at Henderson's. "Luna May," he called out, his voice carrying genuine pleasure at seeing her. "Welcome to our temporary home. I hope the walk wasn't too difficult." "Not at all," she replied, still looking around. "At the impressive camp, this is much more elaborate than I expected. How long have you been here?" "About 2 months," Daniel explained, leading her toward the main cabin. "We wanted to get a real feel for the land and the seasons before we committed to building our permanent ranch. Rose Moonshadow insisted that if we were going to live here temporarily, we might as well be comfortable." As if summoned by the mention of her name, Rose Moonshadow appeared in the doorway of the cabin, her face lighting up with the same genuine welcome that Luna May was beginning to associate with both of them. She wore a practical dress in deep blue, with her long black hair braided and decorated with small silver ornaments that caught the morning light. "Luna May," she exclaimed, hurrying forward with her hands extended in greeting. "I'm so glad you decided to come. Did you have any trouble convincing your father to let you work? Luna May accepted Rosemoon Shadow's warm clasp, surprised by the immediate sense of comfort that came from such simple human contact. He agreed to it, she said. The prospect of regular wages helped convince him. Rosemoon Shadows. Dark eyes searched her face with the kind of perceptive attention that Luna May was still learning to trust. I'm glad, she said simply. Come inside and let me show you around. We can discuss the work over breakfast. The interior of the cabin was a revelation that left Luna May momentarily speechless. Unlike her father's chaotic and often filthy home, the space radiated warmth and careful attention to detail. Hand-woven rugs covered the wooden floors, while Native American artwork decorated the walls alongside practical items like maps and farming implements. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with comfortable chairs arranged nearby and shelves lined with books. This is beautiful. Luna May breathed, turning slowly to take in every detail. Did you make all of this yourselves? Rosemoon Shadow is the artist in the family, Daniel said proudly. She wove most of the rugs and beadwork you see. I'm better with wood and stone, so I handled the construction and furniture. Rosemoon Shadow laughed, a sound like wind chimes that filled the cabin with joy. He's being modest. Daniel can make anything grow and build anything you can imagine. Together we make a good team. Luna May found herself wondering what it would be like to be part of such a partnership. To work alongside someone who complemented your skills rather than competed with or diminished them. The easy affection between Daniel and Rosemoon Shadow was unlike anything she had observed between adults, and she realized she was witnessing what a healthy relationship actually looked like. Sit down and let me get you some breakfast, Rosemoon Shadow said, gesturing toward the wooden table that occupied the center of the room. We can talk about the work while we eat. The breakfast that Rosemoon Shadow prepared was unlike anything Luna May had tasted in years. Fresh eggs from their own chickens, bread still warm from the oven, honey that Daniel had traded for with a local beekeeper, and coffee that was rich and strong without the bitter edge that came from stretching supplies too thin. But beyond the quality of the food, it was the experience of sitting at a table where conversation was pleasant, and no one had to worry about triggering an explosion of anger. The work we're proposing isn't particularly complicated, Daniel explained as they ate. We'll be hiring a crew of 6 men to help with the major construction, and they'll need 3 meals a day plus coffee and snacks throughout the day. The temporary quarters will need daily cleaning, and there will be laundry and general housekeeping. It sounds like a lot of work for one person, Luna May said, already trying to calculate how she could manage such responsibilities while still maintaining her duties at home. Rosemoon Shadow leaned forward, her expression earnest. That's why we want to make sure the wages reflect the amount of work involved. We were thinking $2 a day, 6 days a week, with Sundays off for rest and personal time. Luna May nearly choked on her coffee. $2 a day was more money than she had ever imagined earning. More than most men in the territory made for manual labor. Even after giving half to her father as promised, she would have enough left over to save for her own future. That's very generous, she managed. Are you sure that's not too much? Daniel and Rosemoon Shadow exchanged one of their meaningful looks, and Luna May sensed there was more to this offer than simple employment. Good work deserves fair compensation, Daniel said carefully. And frankly, we have specific reasons for wanting to help someone we believe deserves a chance. The comment hung in the air, loaded with implications that Luna May wasn't entirely sure she understood. She had the distinct impression that Daniel and Rosemoon Shadow saw more about her situation than she had revealed, but she wasn't ready to examine that possibility too closely. When would you want me to start? She asked instead. The construction crew arrives Monday, Rosemoon Shadow said. But if you're willing, you could come out tomorrow and help me prepare the temporary quarters and plan the meals. It would give us a chance to work together before things get busy. Luna May nodded eagerly. already imagining the satisfaction of having meaningful work to occupy her days. I'd like that very much. What time should I arrive? Early morning would be best, Daniel suggested. That way you can return home before dark. We don't want your father to worry about you traveling alone after sunset. The consideration for her safety and her father's concerns was yet another example of the thoughtfulness that seemed to characterize everything Daniel and Rosemoon's shadow did. Luna May found herself wondering what their own story was, what had brought them to this remote corner of Dakota territory, and why they seemed so determined to help a stranger. After breakfast, Rosemoon's shadow gave her a tour of the facilities where she would be working. The cookhouse was equipped with everything necessary for preparing large meals, including a massive wood-burning stove that could accommodate multiple pots and pans simultaneously. The temporary quarters where the workers would sleep consisted of a long, low building with 6 bunks, each with its own small storage area for personal belongings. The men we've hired are all experienced workers, Daniel explained as they walked through the sleeping quarters. They know how to keep things clean and organized, but they'll still need bedding changed regularly and the floors swept daily. Luna May mentally cataloged the tasks already, planning how she could organize her time to accomplish everything efficiently. The work would be demanding, but it would also be satisfying in ways that her current life lacked. Instead of simply trying to avoid her father's anger, she would be contributing to something constructive and important. As they completed the tour, Rosemoon's shadow turned to her with an expression of gentle concern. "Luna May, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but if you ever need a place to stay, even temporarily, you're always welcome here. Sometimes life at home can become difficult." The offer was made so carefully, with such obvious respect for her privacy, that Luna May felt tears prick at her eyes. The idea that someone would offer her refuge without demanding explanations or making judgments was almost overwhelming. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means more to me than you know." Daniel cleared his throat and gestured toward the horses grazing in the pasture. "Would you like to see our breeding stock before you head home? Rosemoon's shadow has an eye for bloodlines that's almost supernatural." The change of subject was clearly intended to give Luna May time to regain her composure, and she was grateful for the consideration. As they walked toward the pasture, she found herself studying Daniel and Rosemoon's shadow more carefully, trying to understand the source of their unusual kindness. The horses were magnificent specimens, clearly chosen with expertise and an eye for both beauty and functionality. Rosemoon's shadow spoke knowledgeably about breeding programs and bloodlines, while Daniel demonstrated an easy confidence around the animals that spoke of lifelong experience. "My father always said that horses judge character better than most people do," Rosemoon's shadow said as a particularly striking mare approached the fence to investigate the visitors. "They sense things about humans that we often miss ourselves." Luna May extended her hand cautiously toward the mare, who sniffed delicately before allowing herself to be petted. "She's beautiful," Luna May said. "What's her name?" "Morning Star," Rosemoon's shadow replied. "She was the first horse we bought when we decided to start this ranch. In some ways, she's the foundation of everything we're building here." The symbolism wasn't lost on Luna May, who found herself wondering if she too might serve as some kind of foundation for the life these remarkable people were creating. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying, suggesting possibilities she had never dared to imagine. As the morning progressed toward noon, Luna May realized she needed to start the journey home if she wanted to arrive before her father's mood deteriorated further. Daniel and Rosemoon's shadow walked with her to the edge of their property, each offering final words of encouragement about the work arrangement. "Remember," Rosemoon's shadow said, pressing a small package into her hands, "you're not just an employee here. You're part of what we're building, and your contributions matter." Luna May looked down at the package, which felt like food, wrapped in clean cloth. "You didn't need to. Everyone deserves to have a little extra sometimes," Daniel said gently. "We'll see you tomorrow morning." The walk home passed quickly. Luna May's mind occupied with plans and possibilities that had seemed impossible just 24 hours earlier. The package from Rose Moon Shadow contained fresh bread, cheese, and dried fruit, enough to supplement her and her father's meager supplies for several days. But more valuable than the food was the message it represented, the reminder that there were people in the world who cared about her welfare. As she approached the family cabin, Luna May could hear her father moving around inside with a particular restlessness that indicated he was searching for something to drink. She paused on the porch, gathering her courage for what she knew would be a difficult conversation. "Pa?" she called out as she entered. "I'm home." Silas appeared from the kitchen, his eyes slightly wild and his hands shaking more noticeably than they had been the previous day. "How'd it go?" he demanded. "They really gonna pay you $2 a day?" Luna May nodded, pulling the coins from her pocket that Rose Moon Shadow had given her as an advance on her wages. "They gave me this to show good faith," she said, placing the money on the table, "and they want me to start tomorrow." Silas's eyes fixed on the coins with an intensity that made Luna May's stomach clench. She could see him calculating how much alcohol those few dollars would buy, and she knew that her advance wages would disappear within hours. "That's good," he said, reaching for the money. "Real good. Shows they're serious people." Luna May watched the coins disappear into her father's pocket with a mixture of resignation and sadness. She had known this would happen, had prepared herself for it, but it still stung to see tangible proof of her father's priorities. "The work will be hard," she said, partly to change the subject and partly to begin preparing him for her daily absences. "Long days, and I'll need to leave early each morning to get there on time." Silas nodded absently, his attention already focused on the prospect of ending his forced sobriety. "You do whatever they tell you," he said. "We need this money, and we can't afford to have you lose this job over some foolish notion." Luna May spent the rest of the day completing her usual chores and preparing simple meals that her father could manage during her absence. As evening approached, she watched Silas become increasingly agitated, pacing the small cabin and muttering to himself about the unfairness of his situation. When he finally left for town, presumably to spend her advance wages on whiskey, Luna May felt a complex mixture of relief and guilt. She was glad to have him gone, glad for the peace that his absence would bring, but she also worried about what condition he would be in when she returned from work the following evening. That night, as she lay in her narrow bed listening to the wind across the prairie, Luna May allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to spend her days at Daniel and Rose Moon Shadow's ranch. She pictured herself cooking substantial meals for hungry workers, maintaining the clean and organized quarters, contributing to the construction of something permanent and beautiful. For the first time in her life, she would be valued for her skills rather than merely tolerated as a burden. She would work alongside people who treated her with respect and dignity, who saw her as a person rather than a responsibility or a reminder of loss. The prospect filled her with an excitement that made sleep almost impossible. As dawn approached, Luna May rose quietly and prepared for her first day of real work. She packed a small bundle with the few personal items she might need, and left a note for her father explaining where she had gone and when she would return. Then she stepped out into the cool morning air and began the walk toward her new life. The eastern horizon was just beginning to show the first hints of dawn as she made her way through the familiar landscape that suddenly seemed full of new possibilities. Behind her lay years of fear and limitation, while ahead waited the chance to discover what she might become when treated with kindness and given the opportunity to grow. By the time the sun crested the hills, Luna May was already halfway to Daniel and Rose Moon Shadow's ranch, walking with a purpose and confidence she had never experienced before. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them as someone who finally had reason to hope for a future worth living. 2 weeks into Luna May's employment at the ranch, Sheriff Marcus Webb rode up to the construction site with the grim expression of a man bearing unwelcome news. The work crew had just begun their morning tasks, hammers ringing against nails and saws biting through fresh lumber. When the lawman's arrival brought all activity to an immediate halt, Luna May was in the cookhouse preparing the midday meal, when she heard the voices outside grow serious and concerned. Through the window, she could see Sheriff Webb dismounting from his horse while Daniel and several of the workers gathered around him, their faces growing increasingly troubled as he spoke. "Luna May," Daniel called out, his voice carrying an unusual tension that made her heart skip. "Could you join us for a moment?" She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped outside, immediately sensing that whatever news the sheriff had brought concerned her directly. Sheriff Webb was a fair-minded man in his 50s, known throughout the territory for his even temperament and reluctant use of force, but today his weathered face carried lines of genuine worry. "Miss Winters," he said, removing his hat respectfully, "I'm afraid I have some difficult news about your father. There was an incident in town last night." Luna May felt the familiar dread settle in her stomach like a cold stone. "What kind of incident?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Silas got into a fight at Murphy's saloon," Sheriff Webb explained carefully. "Apparently he'd been drinking heavily and accused another patron of cheating at cards. Things escalated quickly, and by the time I arrived, your father had been badly beaten." The blood drained from Luna May's face as she imagined her father lying broken and bloodied on the saloon floor. Despite all his faults, despite the years of abuse and neglect, he was still the only family she had left, the last connection to her mother and her childhood. "Is he ... She began, unable to finish the question. "He's alive," Sheriff Webb assured her quickly, "but he's hurt bad. Doc Caldwell has him at his clinic, and he's asking for you. Says he needs to tell you something important before it's too late." Rosemoon's shadow stepped forward immediately, her face filled with compassion. "Of course you need to go to him," she said. "Daniel can hitch up the wagon. We'll have you in town within the hour." Luna May nodded numbly, her mind struggling to process this sudden shift from the peaceful routine she had come to cherish. Just this morning she had been planning menus and organizing supplies, looking forward to another day of meaningful work, alongside people who valued her contributions. Now she faced the possibility of losing her father and being left truly alone in the world. The wagon ride to town passed in tense silence, with Daniel handling the reins while Rosemoon's shadow sat beside Luna May, offering quiet comfort through gentle touches and understanding looks. The construction crew had volunteered to continue working in their absence, but Luna May could barely focus on such practical concerns. Dr. Caldwell's clinic occupied the ground floor of a 2-story building near the center of town. Its clean white walls and antiseptic smell, a stark contrast to the rough frontier atmosphere that surrounded it. The doctor met them at the door, his expression grave as he ushered them inside. "He's conscious," Dr. Caldwell reported, "but he's lost a considerable amount of blood. Several ribs are broken, and there may be internal injuries that I can't properly assess with my limited equipment. I've done what I can, but he's asking to see you." Luna May followed the doctor into the back room where her father lay on a narrow bed, his face so swollen and discolored that she barely recognized him. Silas's eyes, blackened and nearly closed, tracked her movement as she approached, and when he tried to speak, blood flecked his lips. "Luna May," he whispered, his voice barely audible above his labored breathing. "I'm sorry, girl. So sorry for everything." She knelt beside the bed, taking his battered hand in hers despite years of conditioning that had taught her to fear his touch. "Don't try to talk, Pa," she said softly. "Save your strength." But Silas shook his head weakly, his eyes showing a clarity that alcohol hadn't allowed in years. "Need to tell you," he insisted, "about your mama. About why I've been so angry. You deserve to know the truth." Luna May glanced toward Daniel and Rosemoon's shadow, who had positioned themselves near the door to provide privacy while remaining close enough to offer support. Dr. Caldwell busied himself with checking bandages, but she could tell he was listening carefully in case his patient took a turn for the worse. "Your mama didn't die because of you," Silas continued, each word an obvious struggle. "She died because I was too proud to get help. When her labor went wrong, I wouldn't let her go to the doctor. Said we couldn't afford it, said women had been having babies without doctors for thousands of years." The revelation hit Luna May like a physical blow. For 17 years, she had carried the guilt of her mother's death, believing that her very existence had cost Elizabeth Winters her life. Now her dying father was telling her that his stubborn pride, not her birth, had been the real cause of the tragedy that had shaped their entire relationship. "She begged me," Silas whispered, tears mixing with the blood on his cheeks. "Begged me to take her to town. But I was drunk, and I was scared, and I thought I knew better. By the time I realized how wrong I was, it was too late." Luna May felt years of carefully constructed guilt beginning to crumble, replaced by an anger so pure and consuming that it took her breath away. Her father's confession meant that every beating, every cruel word, every moment of self-hatred had been built on a lie. He had blamed her for his own failures, had made her carry the weight of his guilt and shame. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely controlled. "Why let me believe it was my fault all these years?" Silas closed his eyes, and for a moment, Luna May thought he had lost consciousness. When he spoke again, his voice was even weaker than before. "Because it was easier then. Admitting what I'd done. Easier to blame you than to live with knowing I killed the only person I ever loved. I'm a coward, Luna May. A drunk and a coward who destroyed his own daughter rather than face the truth." The admission hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire, filling the small room with the weight of 17 years of misdirected guilt and anger. Luna May stared at her father's broken face, trying to reconcile this moment of painful honesty with the man who had terrorized her childhood. "There's more," Silas continued, struggling to reach beneath his pillow. "Money hidden in the cabin, under the loose floorboard by the stove. Almost $200. Was saving it to leave, to run away from what I'd done, but it's yours now. Use it to get away from this place, to make a life your mama would be proud of." Luna May accepted the small key he pressed into her palm, its metal warm from being clutched in his fevered hand. $200 was a fortune by their standards, enough to truly start over somewhere far from the memories that haunted their shared past. "I don't want you to forgive me," Silas whispered. "Don't deserve it. Just want you to know that none of it was your fault. You're a good girl, Luna May. Better than I ever deserved." Dr. Caldwell stepped forward, his professional demeanor softened by obvious sympathy. "He needs to rest now," he said gently. "The next few hours will tell us whether he'll recover from his injuries." Luna May nodded and stood, looking down at the man who had shaped her life through fear and violence. The anger was still there, burning in her chest like a coal that refused to die, but it was mixed now with a complex grief for the father he might have been, for the family they could have had if he had found the courage to face his demons. "I'll be back," she told him, though she wasn't sure if it was a promise or a threat. Outside the clinic, Luna May stood in the afternoon sunlight and tried to make sense of the emotions churning inside her. Daniel and Rose Moonshadow waited patiently, giving her the space she needed to process what she had learned. "How long has he been like this?" Rose Moonshadow asked finally. "The drinking, the violence?" "Since my mother died," Luna May replied. 17 years. My whole life." Daniel's jaw tightened with barely controlled anger. "And he blamed you for something that was his responsibility," he said. "Made you carry his guilt while he drowned his shame in alcohol." The simple clarity of his assessment cut through Luna May's confusion like a knife. Her father's deathbed confession didn't erase the years of abuse, didn't magically heal the wounds he had inflicted on her spirit. If anything, knowing that it had all been based on his lie made it worse. "I don't know what I'm supposed to." Feel, she admitted. I've hated him for so long, but now I don't know anything. Rosemoon's shadow stepped closer, her dark eyes filled with understanding. You don't have to decide anything right now, she said. Grief and anger can exist together. You can mourn the father you should have had while still being angry at the one you actually got. The wisdom in her words resonated with something deep in Luna May's chest. For the first time, she felt permission to experience the full complexity of her emotions without having to choose between them. What happens now? Luna May asked. If he dies, what do I do? You continue building the life you've started, Daniel said firmly. You don't let his mistakes define your future anymore than they've already defined your past. They spent the next 2 hours at the clinic, waiting for news about Silas's condition. Dr. Caldwell emerged periodically to report that his patient was stable but critical, that the next day would likely determine his fate. As evening approached, it became clear that Luna May would need to stay in town overnight. Mrs. Carmichael has a room at the boarding house, Rosemoon's shadow suggested. You shouldn't be alone tonight. Luna May nodded, grateful for the practical suggestion. The thought of returning to the ranch and trying to pretend that everything was normal seemed impossible, but spending the night in the empty cabin where her father might be dying felt equally wrong. As they prepared to leave the clinic, Dr. Caldwell pulled Luna May aside. Whatever happens, he said quietly, you should know that your father's injuries weren't just from the fight. There are signs of long-term alcohol damage that suggest he's been dying slowly for years. In some ways, last night may have been a mercy. The doctor's words provided a strange sort of comfort, suggesting that her father's fate had been sealed long before the saloon brawl. His body, like his spirit, had finally succumbed to the poison he had been feeding it for nearly 2 decades. That night, Luna May sat by the window in her boarding house room and stared out at the quiet streets of the frontier town. In the space of a few hours, everything she thought she knew about her life had been turned upside down. Her father's confession had freed her from years of misplaced guilt, but it had also left her adrift in a world where the fundamental assumptions of her existence no longer applied. She thought about the money hidden under the floorboards of their cabin, about the possibilities it represented. For the first time in her life, she had the resources to choose her own path, to become someone other than Silas Winter's damaged daughter. The prospect was both thrilling and terrifying. Most of all, she thought about Daniel and Rosemoon. Shadow, about the kindness they had shown her and the life they were building on their ranch. Whatever happened with her father, whatever decisions she made about her future, Shek knew that these remarkable people had already changed her in ways that couldn't be undone. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Luna May whispered a prayer into the darkness, asking not for her father's recovery or death, but for the wisdom to know what kind of person she wanted to become when this night was over. Silas Winters died at dawn on the 3rd day, slipping away so quietly that Dr. Caldwell didn't realize he was gone until he came to check his pulse and found only stillness. Luna May had been sitting vigil in the boarding house, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion, when Mrs. Carmichael knocked softly on her door with the news that would forever divide her life into before and after. I'm sorry, dear, the elderly woman said gently, her weathered hands clasping Luna May's shoulders with maternal comfort. The doctor says it was peaceful. He just stopped breathing during the night. Luna May stared at Mrs. Carmichael's kind face, waiting for the grief to hit her like the crushing weight she had always imagined it would be. Instead, she felt only a strange hollowness, as if someone had carefully removed something from inside her chest and left behind an empty space that echoed with 17 years of complicated emotions. By the time Daniel and Rosemoon's shadow arrived at the boarding house, word of Silas's death had spread through this small frontier town with the efficiency that only bad news possessed. They found Luna May sitting on the front porch, still wearing the same dress she had put on 3 days ago, staring at nothing with the blank expression of someone whose world had fundamentally shifted. "Luna May," Rosemoon's shadow said softly, settling beside her on the wooden steps. "How are you feeling?" It was such a simple question, but Luna May found herself unable to answer because she genuinely didn't know. Relief warred with guilt in her chest, while anger competed with a grief she hadn't expected to feel for a man who had caused her so much pain. "Empty," she finally said, the word feeling inadequate to describe the complex void inside her. "Like I should be sadder than I am, but also like I should be happier. I don't understand what I'm supposed to feel." Daniel knelt in front of her, his dark eyes filled with the kind of understanding that came from his own experiences with loss. "There's no right way to grieve someone who hurt you," he said. "Your feelings don't have to make sense to anyone else, including yourself." Sheriff Webb arrived shortly after, carrying papers that needed signing and questions about burial arrangements that Luna May had never considered. The practical aspects of death, it turned out, were far more complicated than the emotional ones, involving legal documents and financial decisions that she felt completely unprepared to make. "Did your father own the cabin outright?" "Sheriff," Webb asked, consulting his notes, "or was he renting the land?" Luna May realized with a start that she had no idea about the legal status of their home. Silas had never discussed such matters with her, treating her more like a servant than a family member who might someday inherit his responsibilities. "I don't know," she admitted, feeling foolish for her ignorance. "He never told me about things like that. We'll help you sort through his papers," Rosemoon's shadow assured her. "There's no rush to make any big decisions right now." But even as she spoke the comforting words, Luna May could see the practical reality looming ahead of her. At 17, she was legally old enough to inherit property, but young enough to be vulnerable to those who might try to take advantage of her inexperience. The money her father had hidden might provide temporary security, but it wouldn't solve the larger question of what she was going to do with the rest of her life. The funeral was held 2 days later in the small cemetery behind the town's only church, attended by a handful of people who had known Silas more through reputation than friendship. Henderson from the trading post spoke briefly about the man Silas had been before alcohol consumed him, while Dr. Caldwell offered words about the mercy of death when life becomes too painful to bear. Luna May stood beside the grave wearing her mother's black shawl and listening to words about a father she wasn't sure she had ever really known. The man being eulogized as a victim of grief and circumstance bore little resemblance to the violent, unpredictable person who had shaped her daily existence through fear. After the service, as mourners dispersed to their own lives and concerns, Luna May found herself alone at the graveside with Daniel and Rosemoon's shadow. The freshly turned earth seemed to mark not just the end of her father's troubled life, but the conclusion of her childhood and everything familiar about her existence. "What happens now?" she asked, voicing the question that had been haunting her since the moment she learned of Silas's death. "Now you decide who you want to become," Rosemoon's shadow replied. "For the first time in your life, you get to choose your own path without anyone else's anger or expectations limiting your options." The concept of unlimited choice was both thrilling and terrifying to someone who had spent 17 years simply trying to survive from day to day. Luna May had learned to adapt to other people's moods and demands, but she had never developed the skills necessary for charting her own course through life. That evening, they returned to the cabin where Luna May had grown up, a place that now felt like a museum dedicated to dysfunction and lost possibilities. Daniel helped her search for the hidden money while Rosemoon's shadow sorted through Silas's few papers, looking for clues about the legal status of the property. The money was exactly where her father had said it would be, $237 hidden beneath loose floorboards in a mason jar that also contained a letter addressed to Luna May in her mother's faded handwriting. Her hands shook as she unfolded the yellowed paper and read words that had been waiting 17 years to reach her. "My dearest daughter," Elizabeth Winters had written, "if you are reading this, then Silas has finally found the courage to tell you the truth about my death. I am writing this as my labor begins, knowing that something is wrong, but hoping that everything will work out. If it does not, I want you to know that you are not to blame for whatever happens. You are the greatest gift I have ever received, and I love you more than words can express. Be strong, be kind, and never let anyone convince you that you deserve less than complete love and respect. Luna May read the letter 3 times, tears flowing freely as she absorbed her mother's final message. Elizabeth had somehow known that Silas might blame their daughter for her death, and she had tried to protect Luna May from that burden even as she faced her own mortality. She knew, Luna May whispered, showing the letter to Rosemoon Shadow. She knew he would blame me, and she tried to prevent it. Rosemoon Shadow read the letter carefully, her own eyes filling with tears at the deceased woman's wisdom and love. She sounds like she was a remarkable person, she said. Someone who would be very proud of the woman you've become, despite everything you've endured. The legal papers they found revealed that Silas had indeed owned the cabin and surrounding 20 acres outright, having inherited the land from his own father years before Luna May was born. The property was now legally hers, along with the few livestock that had survived his neglect and the farming equipment that hadn't been sold to buy liquor. It's not much, Daniel observed, surveying the modest inheritance, but it's a foundation. You can build on if you choose to stay here. Luna May walked through the small cabin, seeing it clearly for perhaps the first time without the filter of fear that had colored her perception for so many years. The building was solidly constructed, but badly maintained, with repairs needed to the roof, windows, and foundation. With work and investment, it could become a comfortable home, but it would always carry the weight of painful memories. I don't think I can live here, she said finally. Every room reminds me of something terrible. I need to start fresh somewhere that doesn't echo with his anger. Rosemoon Shadow nodded with understanding. That's completely reasonable, she said. You could sell the property and use the money to establish yourself somewhere new. With what your father saved plus the sale of the land, you'd have enough to start over anywhere you choose. The possibility of complete reinvention was intoxicating, but it also raised questions that Luna May felt unprepared to answer. Where would she go? What kind of life would she build? How did someone with no education and limited experience navigate the world beyond the Dakota territory that had always bounded her existence? Or, Daniel said carefully, you could stay in this area and build a different kind of life. The ranch Rosemoon Shadow and I are creating will need permanent staff as it grows. We've been talking about building a house for our foreman and his family. If you're interested, the job could be yours. The offer was unexpected and generous, providing both employment and housing with people who had already demonstrated their commitment to treating her with respect and dignity. Luna May could easily imagine herself growing into such a role, learning the skills necessary to help manage a successful ranch operation. But more than that, Rosemoon Shadow added, we'd like you to consider becoming part of our family. Daniel and I have never been able to have children of our own, and we've both grown very fond of you. If you're willing, we'd like to adopt you legally, to give you the family support you've never had. The proposal hit Luna May like a physical blow, so unexpected and overwhelming that she had to sit down on her father's old chair to process what she was hearing. These remarkable people, who barely knew her, were offering not just employment, but genuine family membership. You mean that? She asked, hardly daring to believe such good fortune could be possible. You would really want me as your daughter? We've wanted you as our daughter since the first day we met you, Daniel said simply. We recognized something in your spirit that called to us, a strength and goodness that reminded us why we wanted a family in the first place. Luna May looked around the cabin one final time, seeing not just the scene of her childhood trauma, but also the place where her mother had loved her, where Elizabeth Winters had written that final letter full of hope and protection. Perhaps there was a way to honor both parts of her history without being trapped by either. "I want to sell this place," she said finally, her voice growing stronger as she made the decision. "I want to use that money to help you build the ranch, to become a partner in what you're creating rather than just an employee. And yes, I would be honored to become your daughter if you're sure that's what you want." The smile that spread across Rosemoon Shadow's face was like sunrise, breaking over the Dakota hills, full of warmth and promise and the kind of unconditional love that Luna May had only dreamed about. Daniel's eyes filled with tears as he embraced her, welcoming her into a family she had never dared to imagine could exist. That night, as they made plans for the legal arrangements that would formalize her adoption and the business partnership that would secure her future, Luna May felt something she had never experienced before: complete safety. Not just physical safety, though that was certainly part of it, but the deeper security that came from knowing she was valued and wanted and loved without conditions. As she packed her few belongings and prepared to leave the cabin forever, Luna May found herself thinking about the circular nature of life and loss and redemption. Her father's death had freed her from the burden of caring for someone who couldn't care for himself, while her mother's letter had freed her from the guilt that had shaped her entire existence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as she learned to navigate life as Luna May Broken Arrow, daughter of Daniel and Rosemoon Shadow, partner in a growing ranch operation, and young woman with unlimited possibilities ahead of her. But tonight, she simply sat on the porch where she had spent so many fearful evenings and watched the stars emerge over land that would soon belong to someone else. For the first time in her life, Luna May Winters was truly free, and she discovered that freedom felt exactly like coming home. 5 years later, Luna May Broken Arrow stood on the porch of the magnificent ranch house that had risen from the Dakota plains like a testament to what could be built when love replaced fear as the foundation of daily life. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pastures where prize-winning horses grazed contentedly, their sleek coats gleaming in the early light as they moved with the fluid grace that had made Broken Arrow Ranch famous throughout the territory. At 22, Luna May had grown into a woman of quiet confidence and natural authority, her blonde hair now worn in a practical braid that spoke of someone who worked with her hands and took pride in physical accomplishment. The fearful, beaten-down girl who had once cowered in her father's cabin was nowhere to be seen in this poised young woman who managed the ranch's business affairs with the skill of someone twice her age. "The buyers from Chicago will be here this afternoon," Daniel called out from the barn, where he was examining a mare who would soon give birth to what they hoped would be their finest foal yet. "Are you ready for them?" Luna May smiled and patted the leather portfolio containing contracts and breeding records that represented months of careful negotiation. The Chicago buyers were interested in purchasing 6 of their best horses for an astronomical sum that would establish Broken Arrow Ranch as one of the premier breeding operations in the American West. "Born ready," she called back, using the phrase that had become their family motto during the challenging early years when everything had to be learned through trial and error. "Rosemoon Shadow finished the presentation boards last night, and I've got all the paperwork organized." The success of Broken Arrow Ranch had exceeded even their most optimistic projections, but Luna May knew that their prosperity was built on something more valuable than superior bloodlines or business acumen. They had created something rare in the harsh frontier environment, a place where people were valued for their character rather than their background, where hard work was rewarded with genuine respect and advancement. Their workforce now included 12 full-time employees, ranging from experienced cowhands to young men who had arrived as drifters and stayed to become skilled horsemen. Luna May had insisted on maintaining the highest wages in the territory, arguing successfully that loyal workers were worth more than the money saved through exploitation. Miss Luna May, called Tommy Rodriguez, a 19-year-old who had shown up 2 years earlier looking for temporary work and had since become their most promising trainer. That new stallion is acting up again. You want me to work with him, or should we wait for Mr. Daniel? Luna May appreciated the way Tommy always asked for guidance rather than making assumptions about his authority. She had worked hard to establish clear chains of command that respected both experience and initiative, creating an environment where everyone could contribute their best efforts. Go ahead and work with him, she decided. But stay alert. He's still learning to trust us, and we need to earn that trust rather than demand it. The philosophy of earning trust rather than demanding obedience had become central to everything they did at Broken Arrow Ranch. Luna May had learned from bitter personal experience that fear might produce compliance, but only genuine respect could create the kind of partnership necessary for excellence. As she walked toward the main house to finalize preparations for the afternoon's negotiations, Luna May passed the small cemetery where they had buried 3 beloved horses over the years. Each grave was marked with a headstone that included not just the animal's name and dates, but a brief tribute to what made that particular horse special. The cemetery also contained a human grave that visitors often found surprising, a simple marker reading, Silas Winters, 1831 to 1884, father of Luna May Broken Arrow. May he find the peace that eluded him in life. Luna May had insisted on moving her father's remains to the ranch, despite Rosemoon Shadow's gentle suggestions that some parts of the past were better left buried. He was still my father, she had explained to those who questioned the decision. I don't have to pretend he was a good man to acknowledge that he was part of my story. His grave reminds me how far I've come and why I never want to go back. The main house reflected the same thoughtful blend of practicality and beauty that characterized everything about Broken Arrow Ranch. Rosemoon Shadow's artistic vision had created spaces that felt both elegant and comfortable, while Daniel's craftsmanship ensured that every detail was built to last for generations. Luna May's office occupied the front room that caught the morning light, its windows offering views of the pastures and training corrals where the daily work of the ranch unfolded. The walls were lined with awards and photographs documenting their success, but the centerpiece of the room was a framed letter from her mother that served as both inspiration and reminder. A soft knock on the door interrupted her review of the afternoon's presentation materials. Rosemoon Shadow entered carrying a tray with coffee and the kind of elaborate breakfast that had become a tradition before important business meetings. Nervous? Rosemoon Shadow asked, settling into the chair across from Luna May's desk with the easy familiarity of someone who had earned the right to ask direct questions. Excited, Luna May corrected, though she had to admit there was an element of nervousness involved in negotiations that could potentially double their annual revenue. This deal could set us up for the next decade if we handle it right. Rosemoon Shadow studied her adopted daughter with the sharp eyes that missed very little. You've been working toward this moment for 5 years, she observed. Are you ready for what success like this might bring? It was a thoughtful question that went beyond simple business concerns. Luna May knew that the kind of wealth they were discussing would fundamentally change their lives, bringing opportunities she had never imagined, but also challenges that came with increased visibility and responsibility. I think so, Luna May said honestly. But I also know that success doesn't mean much if you lose sight of why you wanted it in the first place. We started this ranch to create something good, something that would make people's lives better. Money can help us do more of that, but it shouldn't become the goal itself. The wisdom in her response made Rosemoon Shadow smile with the pride of someone who had watched a daughter grow into her full potential. Luna May's transformation from frightened abuse victim to confident business leader had been remarkable to witness, but her retention of core values despite success was what truly impressed those who knew her story. At precisely 2 o'clock, an elegant carriage pulled up the circular drive that led to the main house. The Chicago buyers had arrived in style appropriate to their wealth and status, but Luna May was no longer intimidated by such displays. She had learned that money without character was ultimately worthless, while character without money could accomplish miracles. The negotiations that followed demonstrated Luna May's mastery of both horse breeding and human psychology. She presented their animals not as mere commodities but as partners in an enterprise that would enhance the buyer's operations while advancing the science of selective breeding. "These aren't just horses," she explained, showing photographs of each animal's lineage and performance records. "They're the foundation of future champions. When you buy from Broken Arrow Ranch, you're not just purchasing bloodstock, you're investing in a breeding program that has consistently produced superior results." The lead buyer, a distinguished gentleman named Harrison Matthews, listened with the attention of someone who recognized expertise when he encountered it. "Miss Broken Arrow," he said, "your reputation in Chicago has grown considerably over the past 2 years. People speak of this ranch as the source of the finest horses in America." Luna May felt a flush of pride at the recognition, but she was careful not to let flattery cloud her business judgment. "We work hard to earn that reputation," she replied. "Every horse that leaves this ranch carries our name and our promise that we stand behind our breeding program." The final agreement exceeded even their most optimistic projections, establishing ongoing business relationships that would provide steady income for years to come. As the Chicago buyers departed with contracts for immediate purchase and future breeding rights, Luna May felt the satisfaction that came from achieving goals through honest effort and superior product. That evening, the entire Broken Arrow Ranch family gathered for a celebration dinner that had become traditional after major business successes. Daniel prepared his famous elk steaks while Rosemoon Shadow contributed dishes that honored her Lakota heritage, and Luna May provided wine that she had been saving for exactly this kind of occasion. As they sat around the large table that accommodated not just the family but their key employees, Luna May looked at the faces surrounding her and marveled at the community they had built together. Tommy Rodriguez sat beside Maria Santos, the young woman he was courting who helped Rosemoon Shadow with the household management. Old Pete Ferguson, the ranch foreman who had taught Luna May everything she knew about horse training, regaled the younger workers with stories of his early days in the territory. "I want to say something," Luna May announced, standing and raising her wine glass. 5 years ago, I was a scared girl with no family, no education, and no prospects. Today, I'm surrounded by people who have become my family through choice rather than birth, working at something I love more than I ever imagined possible." She paused, looking directly at Daniel and Rosemoon Shadow, who had given her not just opportunity, but unconditional love. None of this would have existed without two people who saw potential in a broken girl and decided to help her heal. They didn't just save my life. They showed me what life could become when built on love instead of fear. The toast that followed was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses, unusual enough at that hour to draw everyone's attention. Sheriff Webb appeared in the doorway, his expression serious but not alarmed. "Sorry to interrupt your celebration," he said, removing his hat respectfully. "But I've got news that concerns Luna May directly. There's a woman in town claiming to be her aunt. Says she's come to contest the sale of the Winters property and claim her share of the inheritance." The news cast a shadow over the celebration, reminding everyone that the past had a way of reaching into the present when least expected. Luna May felt her stomach clench with familiar anxiety, but she was no longer the powerless girl who had once faced such challenges alone. "What kind of claim?" Daniel asked, his voice carrying the protective edge that had become second nature. "When anything threatened their family, she's got papers suggesting that Silas Winters had a sister back east who never gave up her inheritance rights," Sheriff Webb explained. "Claims the property sale was invalid because not all heirs were notified." Luna May considered this information carefully, drawing on 5 years of experience in legal and business matters. "Did you verify the documents?" she asked. "Anyone can create papers that look official." Sheriff Webb nodded approvingly at her practical approach. "That's exactly what I'm doing. But I wanted to warn you that she's asking a lot of questions about your current situation. Seems very interested in how much money you might have now." The implication was clear. This supposed aunt was more interested in Luna May's current wealth than in establishing family connections. It was a scenario they had prepared for, knowing that success often attracted people who claimed relationships they had never bothered to maintain. "Let her ask all the questions she wants," Luna May said with the confidence of someone who had nothing to hide. "I have lawyers now and documentation of every transaction. If she has legitimate claims, we'll address them properly. If she's trying to exploit a successful woman she never cared about when I was poor and desperate, she'd discover that I'm not as easy to manipulate as she might expect." The evening's celebration resumed with perhaps less joy than before, but with the solid assurance that came from facing challenges as a united family rather than as isolated individuals. Luna May had learned that success brought new problems, but she had also learned that those problems were much easier to solve when you weren't facing them alone. As the guests gradually departed and the family began cleaning up from there dinner, Luna May stood once again on the porch that had become her favorite place for reflection. The same stars that had once witnessed her father's rage and her own desperation now looked down on a ranch that had become a beacon of hope for everyone who worked there. Rose Moon's shadow joined her in the comfortable silence that had developed between them over the years. "Worried about this woman's claims?" she asked eventually. "Not really," Luna May replied honestly. "Whatever she wants, whatever papers she has, they can't take away what we've built here. This ranch, this family, this life, it all came from choices we made together, not from anything I inherited from my father." The truth of that statement settled around them like a warm blanket. Luna May Broken Arrow had indeed inherited something from Silas Winters, but it wasn't the modest cabin and 20 acres he had left behind. She had inherited the determination to create something better, the wisdom to recognize true family when it offered itself, and the strength to build a legacy that would honor her mother's memory rather than perpetuate her father's pain. As she prepared for bed that night, Luna May reflected on the circular nature of healing and growth. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, including whatever scheme her supposed aunt might attempt, but it would also bring new opportunities to demonstrate the values that had transformed a broken girl into a successful woman. The frightened child, who had once counted bruises in the mirror, had become someone who counted blessings instead. And no distant relative or legal complication could change the fundamental truth that love had triumphed over fear in the end.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.